one helmeted bounty hunter that looked unbelievably cool has spawned an entire, mythology within this bigger mythology, an entire race of people, Mandalorians, it's amazing. And the word Mandalorian never appears in a Star Wars film.
Boba Fett? Where?
You have to go back to the Empire Strikes Back sketchbook that has concept drawings of what Boba Fett was back in the days when he was called a super commando. And it was said that they were Mandalorians, or they wore Mandalorian armor, and they were kind of this race of super commandos that were known for having fought against the Jedi Knights. All of a sudden you have several things that as a kid you're just like, oh my gosh, these are the coolest guys ever. Now, flash forward through the years as the expanded universe began to take shape, there began to be many stories about Mandalorians. All these different stories. Fast forward to Attack the Clones. Oh my gosh, here comes the clones. There's a guy named Jango Fett. Suddenly, Boba Fett's a clone of this guy, Jango Fett. Well, Jango must be a Mandalorian. He must be, wow, this is our first look at that. We make all these assumptions, all these materials come out, all this stuff happens, all this stuff gets defined. Play Knights of the Old Republic, you see Mandalorians thousands of years in the past. All of this because of one helmeted bounty hunter. And then George Lucas tells me one day, we're gonna put the Mandalorians in the Clone Wars. And I go, oh boy, that's interesting. Because let me show you this. And I moved this big pile of material over and I said, this is everything. This is everything that the Mandalorians are right now. And so George and I do what we always do when we come across something that I know exists full well in the EU. We go over it all. Now, all the history of Mandalore that you knew prior to the Clone Wars, it does exist. It absolutely exists. Were they a mercenary people? Yes, they absolutely are. Did they fight against the Jedi? Yes, they absolutely did. Is there a big battle where there's a cataclysm between them and the Jedi? Yes. Have we pushed that idea that the cataclysm was so great that the surface of Mandalore was laid to waste? Absolutely we did. Because to George, the Mandalorians above all, dating back to Empire Strikes Back, are super commandos. They're a race of people that were a military. They can't be so vagabond as they've appeared in the EU. They can't be this group of people that are vastly different in paint job and paint scheme, because if you do that, they look too much immediately like a bunch of Boba Fetts. It robbed Boba Fett of his uniqueness. We needed a military. We needed an army. They have a very uniform look. They are trying to bring back the ancient Mandalorian ways of being the super commando and regain dominion for their mythology, their stories, with what you could call the EU is, that they are a warrior race and eventually mercenaries. Once we have talked about the history of Mandalore and we understand it, especially as envisioned by George, we have to bring that to life. It's always a big challenge. The direction I got from George on the initial vision of Mandalore was that it was a great white sea of sand with these giant cubic buildings resting on the horizon. For the inspiration of the civilization, I gave them kind of a very Nordic kind of flavor, looking at a civilization and the struggle that exists between the pacifism that Satine is trying to implement and the terror and barbarism that Pre Vizsla wants to bring back. Joel Aaron was able to get these very angelic God rays coming down to render through the glass, and we had people down below the glass, above the glass. When you look at any shot, you can look through the floor and sometimes see people down there. The shot where the Death Watch assassin falls off the railing and lays on the cracked surface of the ground, you can see people looking up at him through the ground.
This party's over.
So the idea that Jango Fett is not a Mandalorian, that's something that comes directly from George. I think that when we first saw Jango in Attack the Clones, that a lot of us, myself included, we assumed, oh, he must be a Mandalorian. There he is in Mandalorian armor. So there was kind of this early assumption that Jango must be a Mandalorian, and that was interesting to see. But That was never stated in the films. It's never stated that he's Mandalorian. He's always just referred to as a bounty hunter.
I recently encountered a man who wore Mandalorian armor. Jango Fett.
Jango Fett was a common bounty hunter. How he acquired that armor is beyond me.
The armor and the design of the armor is their identity. It is in the very windows and the walls and the floors and the ceilings. And it's how these people identify themselves. Once you have that silver, blue, black, and gray armor, of course the first thing is, well, why is Boba's green? Where is that coming from? And from the point that we've established in the Clone Wars to the point whenever Boba gets his armor, there's one thing that I think is important, is that Mandalorian armor exists during the Clone Wars. Mandalorian armor that's very close to the design and use of Boba's armor. Boba has tricked his armor out. He's added a few things that our Death Watch guys don't have, because he's a bounty hunter. And much like a gunslinger in the Old West would shoot someone and take their hat or take their guns, or, you know, you win a victory over another warrior and you take something of theirs, Boba Fett's armor probably is made up of different pieces of found Mandalorian gear. It's a little hodgepodge and mix and match, which I think kind of lends itself to the idea that he acquires different pieces of Mandalorian armor over time. Why does he do that? Because his dad wore it. That's the connection for him. So I imagine this Mandalorian armor really isn't being created again and again and again when you look at the time of the Empire. Boba just, whenever he finds some of it, he fixes it up, he uses it. He's probably got a bunch of it in Slave One. Different rocket packs, we've seen that on Boba. Different wrist guards, we've seen that on Boba. So how do our Death Watch go from being these silver, pristine looking uniform military guys? There must be something that happens between here and where Boba's getting all this weird green and yellow and red armor. And we'll just have to wait and see.